I still remember the way Ethan's hand closed around my arm outside Walker's Wash that morning. His face was pale, his eyes unsettled, and in that instant, I felt a chill run straight through me. He didn't need to explain much, just the weight in his expression told me something was terribly wrong. I had no idea that by nightfall, my world, my daughter's world, and the safety of my grandchildren would hang in the balance. 2 hours later, I was sitting at my daughter Lauren's kitchen table, staring down at a pile of papers that didn't just rattle me. They shattered the image of her marriage, passports, flight reservations, 2 driver's licenses with the same face but different names. Everything I thought I knew about my son-in-law crumbled with every page I turned. It's strange how an ordinary day can twist into something you never imagined. I thought I was just running a simple errand, picking up a car from the wash, like I'd done 1,000 times before. Instead, I was about to stumble into a truth that would test everything I believed about family, loyalty, and survival. And it all began on what seemed like a normal Tuesday morning. My name is Carol Bennett. I'm 64 years old, a widow for 3 years now, and the kind of woman everyone in my family leans on. Babysitting, grocery runs, picking up dry cleaning, sitting quietly in the background while everyone else goes about their busy lives, that's me. Sometimes I joke that I've become the family's safety net, the person who makes sure nothing slips through the cracks. But deep down, it's more than that. Helping them is how I stay connected, how I keep feeling needed after losing my husband. That Tuesday morning felt no different from 100 others. The air in Cedar Ridge carried that crisp bite you only get in early fall. I slid behind the wheel of my old sedan, headed out to do a favor for my daughter Lauren. Her husband Colin's BMW was ready at Walker's Wash, and I promised I'd pick it up. It wasn't the first time I'd done it. Little errands like that had become second nature. When I pulled into the lot around 10 o'clock, I wasn't thinking about anything more than whether the kids had remembered their lunchboxes or if I had enough milk at home. Just ordinary thoughts, quiet thoughts. And then I saw Ethan Walker standing near the entrance. My chest tightened in that old, familiar way. We had been young once, full of big plans that never happened. Seeing him still stirred something I thought I'd buried long ago. I didn't realize then that this simple favor, this ordinary morning, was about to become the most extraordinary turning point of my life. When I stepped inside Ethan's office, the air smelled faintly of coffee and the wax they use on freshly polished cars. He looked unsettled, more serious than I'd ever seen him. My heart quickened, though I didn't know why yet. On his desk sat a worn manila envelope. He nudged it toward me, and the way his hand trembled made me nervous before I even touched it. I opened it slowly, expecting maybe a bill or some routine paperwork that had ended up in Colin's car. What slid out froze me. 2 driver's licenses, same photo, same familiar face, but 2 different names. One read Colin Archer, the man my daughter called her husband. The other said Daniel Brooks, with a completely different address and birthday. My chest tightened. I kept pulling papers from the envelope. Property transfers with names I didn't recognize. Bank statements connected to accounts in the Cayman Islands. And then the one that nearly made me collapse, a travel confirmation for 2 adults and 2 children. A one-way ticket to Costa Rica. Departure date October 15th, just 3 weeks away. I tried to steady myself, but my knees went weak. My son-in-law had more than one identity. He had money hidden overseas, and he had plans to vanish. Not alone, but with my grandchildren. Ethan's eyes told me this wasn't some misunderstanding. He whispered the part that chilled me most. Colin had done this before. The article he showed me on his phone was like a punch to the gut. Convicted for identity fraud and bigamy in 2013, released on parole in early 2015. Just weeks before he met my daughter. My mind reeled. What kind of man had Lauren led into her life, and what had he been planning all along, as I tried to process what I had seen in that envelope? Ethan explained that he hadn't handled this alone. His cousin Daniel Price, a retired FBI agent, had looked through the papers before I arrived. Daniel knew these signs too well. He told me men like Colin rarely act on impulse. They follow a pattern, repeating the same steps with chilling precision. The story was always the same. They find a woman with a steady income, usually someone who has been through loss and is vulnerable. They build trust quickly, push for marriage, and begin isolating her from her family. Slowly, they redirect finances, making small moves at first, then larger ones. And finally, when no one suspects, they disappear, often with the children as leverage to keep the wife silent. I remember gripping the edge of Ethan's desk, my mind flashing through the past few years. How Colin had encouraged Lauren to limit visits, how he kept details of his work so vague, how he positioned himself as the rock she depended on. At the time, I told myself it was just marriage growing pains. Now I saw the pattern clear as day, and with only 3 weeks before that flight, I knew I had to act fast. I left Walker's Wash with the envelope clutched tight against my chest, as if holding it close would keep the truth from spilling out. My heart pounded the whole 15-minute drive to Lauren's house. By the time I pulled into her driveway at 11:30, my palms were damp on the steering wheel. Through the front window, I saw what looked like the perfect scene. Lauren was in the kitchen with flour dusting her cheek, probably baking with the kids. Mia's bike was tossed carelessly on the lawn, and little Theo's toy trucks lined the porch. For a moment, I wanted to turn the car around, to pretend I hadn't seen what I had seen. But I couldn't. Not with the clock ticking toward October 15th. Inside, I sat at her kitchen table, the envelope heavy in my hands. I told her I needed her to look at something, that it might hurt, but it was important. When she saw the 2 IDs, confusion clouded her face. When she reached the travel confirmation, her hand shook. But then came the wall I feared. She pushed back, insisting I was wrong, that I had always been suspicious of Colin, that maybe my grief made me see things that weren't there. Her words cut deep, but I knew what denial looked like. She wasn't just defending him, she was defending the life she thought she had, the family she thought was safe. I gathered the papers slowly, leaving her space. In my car afterward, I sat frozen, wondering if I should call the police immediately. But Daniel's warning echoed in my head. If Colin sensed suspicion, he would move sooner. I couldn't risk that. I drove away with my chest tight, knowing I had to find another way. I drove straight back to Walker's Wash, my chest still heavy from Lauren's rejection. Ethan and Daniel were waiting for me. They didn't look surprised when I explained what had happened. Daniel only nodded, calm and steady, as if he had seen this kind of denial too many times before. He laid out what needed to happen next. Every document had to be duplicated and stored somewhere safe. Nothing should be left in Colin's reach. I needed to write down every detail I remembered, every strange comment, every suspicious moment, because sometimes the smallest things became the strongest evidence. And above all, I had to act normal. No hints, no changes in behavior that could alert him. That was the hardest part, pretending, smiling at Sunday dinners, playing along as if nothing had shifted, when inside, I was holding the weight of a secret that could save or destroy us. But the one detail that pressed hardest against my chest was the date. October 15th. The flight reservation gave us just 3 weeks. The clock was already ticking, and every day he stayed unsuspecting bought us one more chance to build a case strong enough to hold. I promised myself I wouldn't waste a single hour. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed. It was Lauren. Her voice was thin, almost broken, and I could hear the strain in every syllable. She said she needed me to come over. Colin was working late, and there was something she had to show me. When I arrived, her eyes were red and tired. She led me straight into Colin's office, a place she said she had always respected as private. She confessed that she had finally logged into the computer with a password she thought was only for their joint account. What she found made her blood run cold. On the screen were 6 accounts she had never seen before. Over the past 18 months, small transfers had trickled out at first, but recently they had become huge. Nearly $2,000 had disappeared, money she believed had been safely invested. Much of it was her inheritance from her father, the nest egg she had trusted Colin to manage. Then she opened a drawer. My stomach sank when I saw the stack of documents she pulled out. Fake passports for Mia and Theo, each with different names and birthdays. Printed flight tickets for 2 adults and 2 children. The same one-way flight to Costa Rica? Lauren's voice shook as she told me she had even found emails to another woman. Messages signed with love and talking about missing the kids. My grandchildren. He had been telling someone else that her children were theirs. For the first time, I saw the truth hit her fully. The walls of denial cracked. She said she had already called the police and that a detective was scheduled to arrive at 8 o'clock that evening. Watching my daughter's heartbreak turn into determination was painful. But it was also the moment I knew we finally had a fighting chance. Detective Nina Alvarez arrived steady and methodical, the kind of presence that calms a shaking room. She laid out the path forward like stepping stones across a river. They had history on Colin. But what mattered now was present intent, the one-way flight. The fake passports. The transfers tied to fresh dates. That was the thread that would hold in court. The safest move, she said, was a public arrest at his office the next afternoon. Fewer variables, more witnesses, less chance of anyone getting hurt. Hearing the words made my stomach twist, but I understood. I kept thinking about the possibility of a handgun in his car. I pictured the parking lot, the glass doors, the startled faces. I pictured Mia and Theo at Miss Patty's daycare, eating crackers and coloring, while the grown-ups tried to keep monsters in cages. We packed copies of every document into labeled folders. Lauren and I rehearsed our own calm voices even. Movements normal. Eyes that didn't dart to the clock. I drove home just before 8:30 p.m., with the plan replaying in my head like a metronome. Tomorrow afternoon, public place. No sudden moves. For the first time in days, I let myself hope. Not a bright, soaring hope, just a small, steady light. I held onto it as the house went quiet, unaware that the night still had its own dark turn waiting for us. That night, long after the detective left, I thought maybe I could finally rest. But peace never lasts when someone like Colin senses his grip slipping. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. No name, no signature, just a warning to stop asking questions. For my daughter's sake. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. I saved it, sent it to Daniel, and told myself not to reply. Still, the weight of it sat heavy on my chest. By morning, the threat was no longer just digital. When I stepped outside, my car windshield was smashed, glass glittering across the driveway like ice. No note, just a message written in violence. I took photos, filed the report, tried to carry on, but the fear was beginning to settle into my bones. That evening, I sat in my living room with Ethan nearby. We had the lights low, pretending normalcy with an old movie playing. Around midnight, the security system chimed. My stomach dropped. Someone was in the backyard. On the camera feed, I saw a dark figure testing the back door, then moving toward a window with a crowbar. My pulse hammered in my ears. Ethan called 911, his voice steady, while I could barely breathe. The glass shattered. The intruder began climbing through. Then the sharp crack of sirens filled the night, red and blue lights flooding the yard. The man stumbled, caught mid-climb, and fell hard inside my living room. Officers stormed in within seconds, pinning him down. When they pulled off the mask, the name followed quickly: Trevor Knox, Colin's accomplice. The fear finally caught up with me after it was over. My hands trembled uncontrollably, the adrenaline fading. But I knew one thing for certain: Colin was not working alone. And if Trevor had come to my door, it meant the fight was far from finished. The next afternoon, at 1:55, my phone rang. Detective Alvarez's voice came through, calm but firm, telling me that Colin Archer was in custody. No incidents, no injuries. I felt the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding finally return. Relief washed over me in waves so strong I had to sit down for a moment, trying to absorb that we had reached this point without anyone hurt. Lauren arrived shortly after, her face pale but steady. There was a weight between us both, grief for the truth we had uncovered, and gratitude that the nightmare had been paused. At least, together. We went over the steps they had taken, confirming that everything had been documented and that Mia and Theo were safe at Miss Patty's daycare. Sitting there with my daughter, I realized that for all the fear and anger, the planning and waiting, the right actions had brought us to this moment. It was not victory, yet there was still a trial to prepare for, but for the first time in weeks. I felt we were breathing in the same space as safety. The fight wasn't over, but the first battle had been won. After the initial relief of Colin's arrest, Daniel brought us more information that turned the situation from personal danger into a broader reality I wasn't prepared for. He showed Lauren and me photos of at least 7 other women, each with children, who had been targeted over the past 15 years. Some had their kids taken for years. Some had only recently been returned. The scope of what Colin had done was staggering, and my stomach turned as I realized that Mia and Theo had narrowly escaped a fate these other children had suffered. I started calling the women, introducing myself as someone who had been in their shoes, determined to make sure no one else would be hurt. One by one, they shared their stories: the quiet fear, the disbelief, the sense of helplessness. But beneath all of it, there was a spark, a shared determination that something had to be done. Together, we formed what we called the Survivors Circle: weekly video calls, sharing documents, planning testimonies. We became a network of support, a force larger than any of us individually. Colin's attempts to manipulate didn't stop just because he was behind bars. Letters arrived for Lauren and the kids, each crafted to provoke guilt, to maintain his illusion of control. We saved everything, monitored each delivery, and Daniel helped us trace the sources. Slowly, The sense of power he had tried to hold over us began to dissolve. Watching Lauren transition from shock and denial to steadfast participation was both heart-wrenching and inspiring. In those moments, I realized courage is contagious, and while the nightmare had touched each of us deeply, the solidarity we built made us stronger than he could ever be. We had survived the immediate threat, but this circle, this unity, was a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of vigilance can ripple outward, saving lives far beyond your own. After the initial storm of arrests and revelations, the next challenge was delicate speaking the truth to Mia and Theo. I knew that shielding them too long would only make their imagination fill in the blanks with fear. Yet, I also needed to protect their innocence as much as possible. Sitting together at the kitchen table, I spoke slowly, carefully, letting each word land like a soft hand on their shoulders. I told them that their father had made very serious mistakes, and that those mistakes had hurt people, including our family. I explained that the authorities had intervened to keep them safe. I watched their eyes widen, the small grip of their hands tighten around mine. I reassured them that while adults deal with complex and painful situations, their role was simply to be kids, to play, to learn, to laugh. Mia asked if he had hurt them, and I had to explain in a gentle way that they were safe and that they had never been in physical danger. Theo, young and trusting, leaned against my shoulder, quietly absorbing the truth. The conversation left a mix of relief and lingering tension in the room, but I knew that honesty, delivered with care, was the strongest shield I could offer. The children hugged me tightly afterward, and in that moment, I felt the profound weight and power of protecting family, not just through vigilance, but through truth and love. With Colin behind bars, the focus shifted to the courtroom. Ada Monica Patel walked Lauren and me through what to expect, explaining how his lawyer would try to minimize his actions, spin the story, and cast doubt on our credibility. I realized quickly that courage alone wasn't enough. Preparation was essential. We organized every document, every email, every traceable transaction. I reviewed the envelope, the passports, the flight tickets, the bank statements, everything I had found that day at Walker's Wash. Each item was a small anchor, grounding the truth in facts that could withstand manipulation. We rehearsed our testimonies, not as actors, but as people who had lived the experience. I practiced telling the story of finding the envelope, of confronting Lauren, of the fear that had gripped me when I realized what he was planning. Each rehearsal made me feel more resolute, more capable of facing the courtroom with clarity. In these moments, I also reflected on how far we had come. From disbelief and denial to understanding and action, every step mattered, and while the trial would be grueling, it was also our chance to make sure Colin could never threaten another family. The preparation wasn't just about winning in court, it was about reclaiming our lives and giving Mia and Theo the safety they deserved. The trial began on April 15th. The courthouse was packed, the air thick with anticipation. I took my seat in the gallery, trying to steady my breathing as Colin walked in, wearing the orange jumpsuit, looking thinner and older than I remembered. There was a flicker of his eyes on me, a moment of pure hatred, but I held my gaze. I knew that feeling fear wouldn't change what had to happen next. The prosecutor laid out the case with precision, presenting the timeline, the pattern, the children, the stolen money, and the lives disrupted. I felt my chest tighten as each piece of evidence was displayed. When it came my turn, I recounted, from memory, the day I found the envelope, the weight of realizing what he planned, the fear for Mia and Theo. I spoke not to dramatize, but to convey truth, the ordinary acts that revealed the extraordinary deception. Lauren followed, her voice steady, recounting her trust, the hidden accounts, the passports, the flight, and how she had almost been convinced by his lies. Each other victim shared their story in turn, showing the jury the reach of his manipulation. Trevor Knox's testimony sealed the picture: every identity, every bank account, every flight plan. They were part of a methodical plan. Hearing the mechanics of his operation laid bare, I felt both horror and vindication. After 6 hours of deliberation, the foreman returned with the verdict: guilty on all counts. The relief that surged through me was overwhelming, but it was tempered by the weight of knowing how many lives had been touched before ours. Colin would never be able to hurt another family. The first step toward true safety for Mia, Theo, and the others had been taken, and the nightmare that had begun with a single envelope was finally reaching its conclusion. Months passed after the trial, and life began to settle into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. Ethan and I married quietly in my backyard. Mia tossed petals with careful excitement, and Theo fumbled with the ring, his giggles echoing through the yard. Lauren stood beside me, a steadfast presence, as matron of honor, her smile hinting at relief and newfound hope. Lauren started therapy, gradually reclaiming her sense of control and trust. She sold the old house and bought a smaller home closer to me, a safe haven for her and the children. The money Colin had stolen was recovered, and she used it to pay off the mortgage and set aside college funds for Mia and Theo. Watching her take charge of her life felt like witnessing resilience itself. Ethan and I merged our lives with ease. We spent afternoons dancing poorly in the kitchen, traveling when we could, and savoring quiet evenings with the kids. Ordinary tasks, the smell of dinner cooking, the sound of laughter, the little routines suddenly felt extraordinary. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lauren reflected on the envelope that had started it all, a small, forgotten thing that changed everything. I reached for Ethan's hand, and we both understood that sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest impact. Bad things had happened, but they had brought love, connection, and strength. And as I watched my family gathered around the table, I realized that surviving was not enough. Thriving, together, was the best victory of all. Looking back, it's remarkable how one small decision, the choice to pick up a car, to notice an envelope, changed everything. That simple act rippled through our lives, revealing truths, protecting my grandchildren, and ultimately reconnecting me with Ethan after 40 years. Life has a strange way of turning disasters into catalysts for growth, love, and resilience. I've learned that vigilance, courage, and careful attention to the signs around us are invaluable. Trust your instincts, even when others doubt you. And yet, it's equally important to act with patience and strategy. Rushing without preparation can sometimes make things worse. Watching Lauren transform from denial to empowered action showed me that strength can be nurtured. And together, a family can become a force no manipulator can break. Now, as I sit in my living room, watching the kids chase fireflies in the yard, listening to Ethan's laughter beside me, I understand that surviving isn't enough. Thriving, rebuilding, and cherishing each ordinary, extraordinary moment that is the real victory. If my story resonates with you, or if you've ever faced moments where vigilance, love, and courage shaped your family's future, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts, comment on what stood out, and if this story inspired you, Consider liking and sharing it with someone who might need a reminder that ordinary acts can create extraordinary change.